Hey, Jared, how's it going, man?
Not bad. How about yourself?
Doing well, doing well. Hey, I am right now. I'm just putting in the poll questions, so I'm gonna just kind of keep myself on mute if that's all right, so I can get these done here.
That is okay. I'm not good at talking anyways.
Well, glad to have you here, man. Excited for this evening.
Thank you. Same.
Hi, Josh. Hi, Jared.
Hello, Annette. How are you?
Hello.
I'm doing good. I got back from Washington.
Oh, very nice. What were you doing in Washington, Annette?
Company retreat.
Nice. Ooh, company retreat. Good deal. Is it a fun kind of company retreat, or the kind you're glad to be home from?
Fun. Like they rented they took us out in a boat dinner, drinks and everything on a
Ooh,
boat,
nice.
and yeah, it took us around Washington D.C.
Oh, that is awesome.
That was nice.
Okay, that's okay. When you say Washington, not Washington State District, okay, cool.
Yeah, district.
So I lived in DC for a year. This was back in like 2017, 2018. But man, I just absolutely loved it. Do you live in that area, Annette?
No, I live in Huntsville, Alabama.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Is that your first time over in DC?
Yep, that was my very first time. I was staying in Alexandria, so.
Nice. Right
Yeah.
on. Well, that's a pretty cool work trip to get to go on.
Yeah, that was nice. It was pretty cool.
Very good. Hey, Ma, forgive me. I don't think I have met you yet. I'll have my camera shortly here.
Good evening, or morning. I don't know where you guys are located. I'm on the East Coast. Yes, my name is Asad Anwar. That it picked up my initials from my Google account. So
Excellent. Saddam, welcome. Where are you working from?
oh, I am working out of Fairfield, Connecticut. So
Fairfield, Connecticut.
Oh, nice.
Well, welcome. We are glad to have you here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah. Saddam, what brought you here? How did you find out about the group? And love to hear about where you're at in your CISSP journey.
Sure. So this is the first class I'm attending. I actually recently, in fact, last week was it last week? Yeah, last week I got my CC certificates and the certificate in cybersecurity. That was just a warm up. Just now, I am planning to hopefully get the CISSP in December. So
In December?
yes, December end. So I work. I mean, I have a full-time job, of course. So I need to get some time, and so I just recently embarked, and I was lucky enough that somebody, I don't know who to thank for this, but told me about the school group. I'm like, man, I've been looking for this because I have nobody else I know who's doing
Oh,
CISSP. So this is a lifesaver. I mean, I've been like, I don't know how many times I check in this group in the last 1 week. So this is excellent. I could not ask for more. Yeah, I was feeling pretty lonely. It's a big target. So awesome.
Mhm.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
It is a big target. You're not wrong there. What would have been some things in the community that have really been valuable for you as you're getting
I love the quizzes. I absolutely love those
Quizzes.
quizzes. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'll work up the courage to submit my own. I am a practitioner, so I have been actually in this field for 7-8 years in my entire career of 30 years or so. But I just want to make sure anything that goes on is absolutely vetted like 3 times before I add. So
Excellent. Well, good deal. You got a few months before December comes, so that's excellent.
Yep.
Alex, welcome. I'm glad to see you back here, man.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Good deal. Let's see, gang. I'm going to go grab myself water real quick, and then by the time I get back, we should be ready to get started. So I'll be back in just a moment.
Okay.
Okay. I see we have Supriya. Welcome. Thanks for being here. I don't think that you and I have met. Welcome to the group here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Oh, and Sarah, it is a delight to see you here, Sarah. If any of you have not
This
met
is
Sarah,
actually the first time.
awesome. This is Sarah has been helping out as a moderator in the community. So you maybe have seen SM. So she's been helping out the group quite a lot. So show your appreciation for her in the community.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Sarah. I didn't know from the initials, so thank you so much. I've been going through your posts assiduously. They're very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Sarah.
Will, good to see you. Cliff, Cheryl, excellent. Well, we'll get started here. Love seeing the new faces on here. Faces. That's okay. You guys can be off camera. Sarah and I are the brave ones. I love seeing you guys here. Thank you for taking the time to study for an exam and take the time out of your evenings or your mornings for those of you who are overseas being here. My name is Josh. I'm the instructor for this course. I am ISC squared certified or ISC2 as a CISSP. I got it in 2020. And I also have my master's degree in cybersecurity and information assurance, and am just next month starting to teach my first undergraduate course. So you're here to learn about the CISSP and prepare for the exam. I am here to learn how to teach in a lot of ways. So this is new to me. I love getting to, if those of you that have worked with me, I really enjoy teaching. I really enjoy cybersecurity. If you have a question, ask. And I'm not always going to know the answer. So right next to me on screen too, I've got my list. If you ask me a question where I just am not confident, I'm not going to tell you the wrong answer. And if I tell you a guess, then I'm going to make sure it's clear what percentage of confidence I have on that. So I don't know everything. You guys don't know everything, but we're studying this together. So I appreciate the space to do that. Participation makes the biggest difference. I would love it if you guys ask questions, engaged. I will ask questions. Some of them are rhetorical, but if you jump in, I really appreciate that because it makes the most out of the content and it brings up questions that we can address in later groups too. So we are going to have some polls as well with practice questions. Thanks for your patience in advance. I'm still a little bit new to running polls while teaching. So if there's some glitches, thanks for just your patience as I'm kind of figuring that out. Awesome. Before we dive into any of the content, awesome. Saravanan, good to see you, man. April, awesome. I love seeing you guys coming back. Who has questions to start off? Any topics, questions, concerns, exam questions that you've come up against that I can either have on my list or have in mind to cover tonight or later? This is open-ended.
Yeah, Josh, I actually have a question.
Yeah, fire away, Alex.
So I've been doing a little bit of reading, and I see the OSI come up quite a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, from your experience, how in depth is the exam going to go into that? Do you foresee questions, a lot of questions surrounding the OSI? And
Yeah. Really good question, Alex. Absolutely. So we're talking about the OSI model, and there will absolutely be questions about it. Typically, the way that you'll see those questions is they might introduce a technology or a set of technologies and ask you what layer those in the OSI model that those operate, or vice versa. They'll be discussing layers and ask you for a technology or a solution that addresses something within that layer that functions at those layers. So I don't have any questions offhand that are specifically related to that, but I've jotted down OSI model. That's worth going into more detail on. I would definitely be comfortable and have memorized the layers in their order, and just kind of have a good sense of what is going to be living at each layer. Who remembers the acronym offhand for the OSI model? I don't have it off the top of my head. Does anyone want to just jump up? Someone's got the acronym that they know.
Please do not throw sausage pizza away.
Boom. Please do not throw sausage pizza away. Well done on that. So I've got that jotted down, Alex. We'll do another session that goes into OSI a little bit deeper. But yeah, great question. Good point of focus.
Okay, so I see a lot of questions regarding single sign-on and also federated identity. And maybe this is something which might be easy for other people, but since this is something that I've not worked in, so I was covering that topic today. I don't seem to wrap my head around like what's the difference, like how are they different and how are they similar?
Excellent. Great question, Sarah. Okay, I've got SSO and federated identity jotted down. We can explore the differences between the two. Great question. That's a great question. Yeah, who else has got something?
Can you add Kerberos along with that?
Kerberos. You betcha.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around that whole process from beginning to end.
I'm glad you asked about that, Paul, because I went into my exam not very confident on Kerberos. So I really appreciate you asking that, because that's something I wish I had studied going into the exam. All right. Anything else that's really weighing on you guys, heavy on your heart for the exam? Okay.
I think there was a poll earlier, and it said something like the question had the most, or the answer had the most votes would get mentioned in this exam today. And I think the one that won was cryptanalysis attacks.
Absolutely. And Sarah, thanks again for publishing that poll. So again, Sarah, as a part of her moderator duties, are helping to post these things so we can gather information on what we want to cover. So thank you, Will. We'll probably cover that on Thursday, be my guess. We won't get to it today, though. But I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's exactly where we're going to start pulling in more information, just so we don't have overlap on the same topics, which can be kind of common. So awesome.
Just about the media reuse.
Media reuse? As far as like data erasure methods, is that what you're referring to? Unpack that a little bit more for me, Struggle.
Right, that's correct. Like, so if you want to reuse the media, like, what would be, there are like different things, right? Like sensitive, top secret, all the stuff. So what to do, like, when you want to use a media that like that has like sensitive data or top secret data in case of reuse. What would be the good method? Yeah.
Okay, I've got that jotted down on my list as well. These are great topics, guys. The more specific, the better.
Change management versus release management.
Change management versus release management. Okay.
Because the other one is always confuses me.
Excellent. Okay. So we'll go into, I don't know that we'll go into those. We'll see. That's on my short list for next week or when we have time later this afternoon, or later this evening. So we will go through some of the topics that we had from last week. So these are spillover topics and a couple of things to expand on them. So just to kind of give you guys a sense of what we're going to be chatting about, it's mostly surrounding IPsec, Internet Protocol Security, the different types of headers that we use and their use case. We're also going to talk about IKE. I'm going to put that in the chat here. Someone tell me what IKE stands for. Someone knows it offhand.
Internet Key
Key
Exchange.
Exchange.
Well done, Internet Key Exchange. Okay, so we'll talk about IKE and what that does in relation to IPsec and some of these headers. And then as we have time, we're going to go into identity assurance levels and some assurance models as well. Kind of similar topics. We're not going to go as deep into those, but if we have time, we'll go into those. Alex, looks like you raised your hand, buddy.
Yeah, just a quick question. IPsec and IKE are encryption algorithms like WireGuard, right?
Great question. We're going to unpack that today, and I think you'll have a really good understanding of both, hopefully.
Okay.
They are heavily related to encryption. They themselves are not encryption standards, but it'll make more sense as we go along this evening. Okay. So, I'll make that go. All right, so let's talk about, actually, you know what? Before we get started, Will, you had a great question last time. We were discussing message digests. We were discussing message digests specifically in the context of email signatures. Who wants to refresh our memory on what a message digest is in that context?
In taking a hash of the email and signing it with your private key.
Well done. Very well done. Sarah wasn't even here last week, and she's nailing it. Good job, Sarah. Okay. So yeah, a message digest. It's something to validate the integrity of an email in the context of an email signature. And Will, correct me if I'm misremembering this, but the question that he asked last week was, what about on a backup? If we take a hash of a backup, is that a message digest? And he's 100% right. So I'm really glad you asked that question. So a message digest isn't specific to email necessarily, but it still is not one-to-one equivalent with a hash. So recall that all hashes are not a message digest, but all message digests are composed of a hash. It's a hash of something, though. The of something is the key part of that. To be a message digest, it has to be monitoring the integrity of some object. It could be an email. In Will's example, it could be off of a backup. So getting the message digest or the hash of a backup to make sure we can validate its integrity. It can also be kind of in the context that we're going to talk about it today. We won't talk about message digests, but we'll talk about other integrity factors for packets, individual IP packets. There's a message digest that can be associated with those even to validate the integrity of it. So, Will, thank you, man. I'm so glad you brought up that question because you filled in a gap from my understanding there.
Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I love it. So we're going to talk about IPsec. Who is familiar with the modes of operation for IPsec? Someone know them off the top of their head?
Tunnel and transport mode.
Tunnel and transport mode. Very well done, Sarah. Okay, someone besides Sarah, tell me a little bit about the difference between the two. What's you guys can teach me a little bit before we go into depth here. Tunnel and transport mode. Yeah, April.
Okay. So tunnel mode is end-to-end encryption. It does encrypt the header, the trailer, and the address. End-to-end or the other does not only encrypts the payload for IPsec.
Yeah, transport mode. Perfect, April. That was a great explanation. So in transport mode, it's not just point-to-point E to B, like a site-to-site sort of a deal. With transport mode, it needs more flexibility, so the header of an IP packet is left unencrypted. The payload, or whatever the content of that packet, is still encrypted in transport mode, but the internet needs to know how to route it around. So the actual header is left unencrypted. That header is what tells the internet how to navigate around. What's the originating, like the source and destination IP? That's part of the header that you have to worry about. So if that's encrypted, there needs to be some other mechanism to ensure deliverability, which is where we switch from transport mode to tunnel mode. So transport mode, send a message out. It's protected by IPsec, and it can go anywhere on the internet because that header is unencrypted. The whole internet can read it and move it around as it needs to. In tunnel mode, we have to define where those packets are going to go so that we can encrypt the header. Now, the header is invisible, but it has the configuration to go from one site to the other. So those packets already know by default where they're supposed to be headed. That's the main difference. And as April called out, the encryption is still taking place on the payload. It's always going to be encrypted, whether it's transport or tunnel mode. In tunnel mode, the difference is it's usually a site-to-site situation going over the internet. So there needs to be some protection of confidentiality. And we're going to encrypt the header as well. So there's information in a header that can be disclosing, I guess, or could be used by attackers. Now let's dive into that a little bit deeper. Let's think about inside of a company, completely internal. Tell me about why we would want to use transport or tunnel mode inside of our network. Tunnel seems like it might be more secure. Tell me a little bit about that. Thinking internally in your company, what are some of the pros or cons of each?
Well, it's not going out to the internet, so it doesn't need to be fully encrypted. So you can focus on speed with transport mode.
That's exactly right. Yeah, great job, Will. One of the call outs there was speed, efficiency. You're not encrypting the header, and it's not one point to one point, kind of a static route almost. It's more flexible. Inside of a company, we don't have to worry about the header being encrypted. Everyone in the company should be okay knowing where that is going, or there should be subnetting or things like that, other layers of protection that kind of make that irrelevant. So, and we'll call it out perfectly, that it can still be encrypted inside. We still have a responsibility to encrypt data in transit in a lot of situations. So we don't sacrifice that. We just choose a different type of transport method. It's a little bit lighter weight. Okay.
Hey, quick question.
I have a question.
Yeah, Paul,
Sorry,
I'll have you go first here. And then, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick, what you guys touched on, what use case scenario would you use tunnel mode within the organization?
Great question. Okay, so let me rephrase that. Paul, stop me if I'm misunderstanding. So we talked about internal in an organization. Let's say it's a hospital. So we have one hospital site, and they've decided within that hospital site, we're going to use IPsec, and we're just going to keep it in transport mode. So in transport mode, remind me, Paul, is the header encrypted or unencrypted in transport mode?
It's unencrypted. Only the payload is encrypted.
Exactly. Perfect. So no sweat there. Now let's take that same case and let's expand it. So we're talking about a hospital still. Let's say they have a remote clinic in the same city. Would transport mode have the same types of protections in that case if they now needed a site-to-site connection?
Oh, okay, I kind of see where you're going. If it's off campus or...
Yeah, if we need site-to-site connections that are still internal within the company, then yeah, we would want to set up a tunnel. So there'd be one established point in site A, one established point in site B. So when a packet gets sent, it'll pass through that final point, the router, the firewall, whatever's doing that work of encryption. It's going to get encrypted, including the header, and then it'll go out across the internet. If anyone at the internet is looking at that, they're not going to see the internal sources or destinations.
Gotcha.
You're going to see those two front runners is all, the public facing ones. So it doesn't disclose anything behind the network.
Makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, awesome. Let's see. Tro, and would you raise your hand? Go ahead. You have a question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. So in terms of the encryption application, sometimes it's loaded on the router, sometimes it's loaded on the firewall. What's the preference, and is there any preference which is better, the router or the firewall?
Very good question. That's a really good question, and this is not a good answer, but it's situation depending. And the situation might be spelled out in questions, especially on your CISSP exam. And we'll focus on the exam portion, less about the real life application, even though in theory they should mirror. But really it's what is the job that needs to be done? What device is most specialized for that job? And you have to think about the workload too. So if we're dealing with a lot of encryption, sometimes we'll offload that encryption even to maybe like a proxy or something equivalent to that, whose only job is let's be the encryptor and decryptor of this. Like in my home, I use a Soho router. It does everything. It does all the encryption on the device because there's not a heavy load for it. So it's not a great answer to your question. In most cases, I would say the firewall, because it is that external point where it will be doing the decryption of the actual header and the rest of that. The packet might still be encrypted though at that point, and another device might be doing that encryption or that decryption. So does that sort of answer your question at all?
Yeah, except it's another hop, right? It's another hop in the actual transmission through the firewall to outside. So I'm just wondering whether it adds to latency. Network sort of theory is that you go to the end point, the last endpoint before exit, and you put stuff on that last endpoint. So you reduce latency. So I'm just wondering, is there anything related to latency when you have to do encryptions and large amounts of them?
Absolutely. And that is a great point. So one of the things that Tro brought up for us is the idea of having something decrypted or encrypted on an actual system. Let's just make a really easy example here. I've got my laptop right here, and I'm going to send an email to my employer. That email technically will go to some email server, and then they'll access the email. So if we wanted to, we could have the email server do all of the encryption and decryption. That's an option for us. And the other option is we could have individual devices do encryption and decryption. So my laptop would be responsible for the cycles that it would take to encrypt. Then it would pass to the server, and the server doesn't have responsibility for encryption or decryption. It just would have routing essentially for the mail protocol. So really great points on that. You have to consider where you want your efficiencies and what configurations you have available. So it's a hard specific answer. There is theory and math behind it, which it sounds like you know more about it than I do, but it's a great concept to keep in mind. What is the job? What is the weight of the job? And what devices can be used or specialized to use for that job?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great question and great thought. Sarah, I think you had a question as well.
Yes. So is link encryption the same as site to site, or is it something different?
Link encryption. My understanding is yes, but someone else shout out if I have a misunderstanding on that term.
I thought link encryption was for actual links that are meant to be kept secret within a company, or like meant to be kept private. That's what my thought was, because I wasn't thinking that link has to do with site to site or anything like that.
So site to site is a VPN type, right? Not a encryption type.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. David, thank you for bringing up that point. It's nice to meet you, by the way. I don't think you and I have interacted yet. So, yeah, Sarah, I don't have a good answer for your question, but I have it jotted down here. Whoa. Come back. Sorry, give me a second. And I will get you an answer for that. Elvie, you get a question. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, just all this talk about site to site with IPsec got me thinking about when we're, federated with like another organization. Like I know typically we establish tunnels, right, or VPNs or different subnets depending on the resource.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking about IPsec. I never thought about whether or not that's something to be taking into consideration when we're federating with another organization that's separate than ours. Those are things that we have to take into account for the tunnel mode.
Yeah, very good question. I'm gonna jot this down because I think we'll address a piece of your question on the next thing we're going to talk about, but not the whole. So I want to jot down your question here to make sure I have it in my mind. Sorry, I can't type and think at the same time. Okay. Yeah, great question. I think we'll get to at least a piece of that, but continue to ask questions, please, Elvie. All right. Any other questions before so we've talked about the modes of operation, tunnel and transport. The next thing that we're going to address is authentication headers, AH, and encapsulating security payload, ESP. So very closely related to this. We're going to talk about those two header types. You'll definitely have questions related to tunnel transport and authenticate AH and ESP. Let me put those in the chat here. Supriya, I think you raised your hand. You have a question?
Yeah, in the tunnel mode, you said there should be other means to define where the packets needs to go. So I was just wondering how that is defined.
Yes, that is a great question. So in tunnel mode, there's a decent amount of configuration that often has to happen before tunnel mode because it's 1 point to 1 point. So we have to set up that configuration so that if a packet gets to, say, like an outgoing point, your firewall going out into the internet, then that gets assigned. A new IP header gets attached over the top of the encrypted payload, essentially. Let me grab a diagram that's actually a little bit easier. Normally I have more visuals prepared. I find them just so much more helpful. Let me find a visual, and let's just do authentication header. Okay. I'm going to put this in the chat for us here. So when a packet goes to, let's take the case of me, I'm going to send an email and it's going to go through my home router combo firewall, and then I'll go out to the internet. So my packet gets to my router, and we're going to take the case of tunnel mode. Tunnel mode, that router knows exactly where it needs to go. It only has one other site configured for this type of a communication. And if we're using this, then the packet is going to get encrypted, or the payload is going to get encrypted. And we still have the original header that's associated with this, because this is in, excuse me, I got a little off track off of there. So the payload gets to that point, and it could already be encrypted potentially at that point. But if we're going to use tunnel mode, then the whole thing, including the header, is going to get encrypted. And then we're going to have an additional header tacked on top of it. That header's only job is to get that packet from where it's supposed to go, or where it's originating from, to the other end of the tunnel. That's its only job, that header, is to get it from that site to the other site. So there's an additional header that's added on at that stage. So we'll talk about headers a little bit more, and then repeat your question if it doesn't answer it. Again, I wish I had some more visuals prepared for some of this. So ask your question again if it still comes up. Okay, let's talk about authentication headers and ESPs, encapsulating security protocols. So who can tell me the biggest difference between the two of these? There's one glaring difference.
Integrity and encryption.
Integrity and encryption. Great. Encryption is the big piece that I want you to take away on this. So an authentication.
Josh, have you pulled up a visual? Like, I can't see anything.
Oh,
Is there?
I just put something in the chat as well, Sarah. Great question.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not much of a visual, unfortunately. It's just the original IP header, the authentication header, and then the payload that I posted there. So the authentication header, this does nothing for encryption. What this does, there's a couple elements of it. Let me grab this. Here, I don't know if I'll get to share this. So authentication header, so I'm going to use the word integrity, which is very important. So to validate the integrity, this is within a packet. We've been talking about integrity in the sense of like message digest for backups, like Will had mentioned, and we talked quite a bit about email signatures and the integrity that they can provide with that hash. We've also talked a lot about authentication or authorization. Not authorization, authentication. Can we validate that the person is who they say that they are? And this helps to provide for both of those, the authentication header, because there's what's called a sequence number at the very end. And the sequence number, who can tell me what kind of an attack that helps to prevent?
Session.
Yeah, a session. Yeah, another term for that could be anti-replay attack or a replay attack. And all that is you take a packet and I'm going to replay that packet and see if I can get the same result. Maybe there was a token attached somewhere where there's still a session in play. So yeah, great point. This sequence number helps to make sure that, so I send a message, there's a sequence number behind it. There's a message that gets sent back, that sequence number increments, and it goes back and forth so that if an attacker tries to insert themselves in the conversation, there's an immediate discrepancy. Okay, there's a duplicate sequence number here. Something is not correct. So that's how it provides that authentication, or excuse me, not the authentication piece, but anti-replay protection or the session capture, session replay and protection. Let's see, did someone have a question? Alton and Sarah. Yeah, fire away. Alton, I don't think I've met you. Great to meet you.
Oh, hello. I wanted to know what authentication header. I know I saw replay attacks, but does it also have to deal with session hijacking too?
Let's see, session header with, it very well could, absolutely. It would depend more on the specifics of what types of session hijacking attacks, but a replay attack can be used to initiate those. So they're very closely related. We won't go too deep on that, but yeah, great. I'm glad you brought that up because they can be closely linked.
Okay.
Yeah, the concepts that we're discussing about replaying packets or what people might use as a technique to start that type broader attack like you're bringing up. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Sarah, so you had a question as well?
Yes. So I want to ask that why is it a sequence number and not a random number if what we're trying to achieve is like prevent replay attacks? And if it's a sequence number, do you not think it's possible for the attacker to kind of like time the insertion of their packets in the communication? So
Yes.
if you can explain that.
Excellent. Sarah is thinking like a hacker for sure. Well done. So the sequence number. Now, I'm going to just tell you right off the bat, my confidence level on the next answer that I have is about 70-ish% or so. The sequence number does need a sense of randomness. So the first sequence number is randomly generated as a part of their negotiation. So they are starting from a random point. After that, it increments normally. But you're exactly right. Otherwise, I could just reach out the sequence number of 1 or something like that and start the conversation. So again, my confidence level on that is, I would say, moderate to moderate high, worth double checking. But that's my understanding. The second piece of your question was about couldn't they try to insert themselves if they knew the sequence number? And you're absolutely correct. And there's ways that they prevent that we'll go into a little bit. Part of what you're discussing is almost like a race condition. You can tell me a little bit about what a race condition is.
Should I, or is anybody else going to?
I'll let you. Yeah, go for it, Sarah.
Okay. So I think it's also called time of check to time of use, in which you basically check if a resource is available and then you try to access it. So it's like a sequential operation which takes place like very prompt, like in a swift manner, and the attacker tries to take advantage of the little window that they get to carry out their attack.
Yeah, you're right. You're on the right track for sure. It's exploiting the timing of things, and that's pretty much what you were telling us. Yeah, the hacker is exploiting the timing of when certain operations happen. So in this context, there is, in certain configurations, a timing mismatch where someone could try to insert themselves into a conversation. That usually gets fleshed out because sequence numbers start to get duplicated and something gets caught as there's something going on here, suspicious. But just to go a little bit more on race conditions, and David, it looks like you're posting something as well, which is awesome. Thank you guys for posting other things in the chat. It brings other elements of resources and conversation to people, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm trying not to interrupt. I just want to put up some resources people can go and look at.
I love it. Everyone, we all need resources for sure. Plus, it's just more opportunities. If you guys are reading through something, you guys might say, oh, Josh said it was this, but it's actually tweak it this way and it makes more sense. So race conditions, the way you'll mostly see them played out, it's a lot of times in software or product or system configuration and security, where you have two things that are happening almost simultaneously. And depending on the order in which they actually happen and possible external circumstances, like a hacker trying to weasel their way into that order of operations, bad things can happen. Race conditions are kind of difficult to diagnose sometimes and difficult to solve sometimes. So we're not going to go into them in more detail tonight, but just a refresher on race conditions. And yeah, Sarah, the scenario you brought up about sequence number injection, that is kind of a race condition. It's a stretch on the term, but the same principles apply to that. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay. Let me grab my notes. Okay, so authentication header. The big thing that this does not do is encryption. Authentication header provides for integrity, so it makes sure that none of the data was altered. It does authentication, so it makes sure that whoever sent that actually did send it. And then we've talked about the anti-replay or the anti-session attacks that happen with an authentication header. So the upgrade that we got with encapsulating security payload is encryption. That's the biggest thing that this does, is we now can validate, or we can now have confidentiality validated by using ESP, Encapsulating Security Protocol. So let's pause for a moment. Authentication header helps us out with integrity, authentication, and it prevents some other attacks. Now we do ESP.
Does he pause for everybody else?
Oh, I was about to ask that, Will.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering too.
Left us on a cliffhanger.
Okay.
Does anyone know, is there a way to message someone directly on this thing, on this app?
Yeah, you go to the chat section. Are you talking about within Google Meet, or are you talking about on the school app?
within Google Meet. Like if I want to send Josh.
Josh just dropped off, so I think he lost his internet connection or something, so might be rejoining.
Okay, but yeah, like if I want to send Josh like directly a message.
Oh, welcome back.
I don't think so, Paul. But I'll look into it.
Oh, okay.
Can you guys?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna hear all. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We got it now.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Hey, Josh, you still there?
Guess he's using transport mode.
see what you did there.
Okay. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I lost power. Is what's going on. There's a wow. That's amazing. I don't know if I can flip the camera around, but it's like it's hailing.
Yeah.
So hang
Oh,
on
are
a
you in the
sec.
hurricane?
I think it's raining a lot on the deck. Yeah.
What state are you in, man? Are you in the hurricane's path or?
Apparently so. I'm in Montana.
Well, no,
Oh.
that's not.
No, nowhere near.
All right. Well, let's see. I'm gonna get onto my computer here. I don't need the internet to keep going. I think I've got my video off. All right, guys. I'm working from my phone here, so you'll just have to speak up if you have questions or anything, and we can still keep going for a little while. Sorry, I don't think I can do polls from this, but I'll double check. I lost my polls. Sorry, guys. I had some practice questions prepared for us, but we can keep going a little bit. All right. So we were talking about authentication headers. We clarified that they help us with integrity and authentication, but not confidentiality at all. And then we talked about encapsulating security payloads. The biggest difference being confidentiality is they actually encrypt the payload. So let's think about the pros and cons of each of these. Who has a couple of ideas of why we would want to use one versus the other? Confidentiality obviously is a big one. What are some other
Just
reasons?
one question.
Yeah.
Does ESP also provide integrity and authentication, or only confidentiality?
It is. Sarah, I'm so glad you asked that because I did not. Yes, it absolutely does. Encapsulating security payload, it helps with confidentiality. It also helps with authentication, same way as AH. It also helps with integrity and anti-replay protection. So essentially it has all the same sort of things that are going on. It just also does encryption of the payload. So yeah, great question, Sarah. I appreciate you asking. So what are the pros and cons other than encryption or confidentiality that we would want to consider between these two? Why would I want to use an authentication header if ESP provides me encryption too? Anyone think of a reason?
Performance overhead, perhaps?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Performance overhead. If we're dealing with just internal data or non-sensitive data that the confidentiality isn't very important of, but we still want to validate the integrity and authentication of the packets, then yeah, why not? It'll reduce our overhead, exactly the processing overhead. So the analogies that I like to think about this that kind of help me distinguish authentication headers versus encapsulating security payload, ESP. So an AH is almost like a stamp, like an official document stamp on something that says, okay, I am validating that this piece of paper or this packet came from whoever it says it came from, and it hasn't been tampered with. It's got my seal of validity on it. So that would be the authentication header, just stamping a document. Anyone can read the document, but we know that it was signed by who it says it was signed by, and that it contains what they want it to contain. It has integrity. So the flip side of that analogy with encapsulating security payload, not only would it be stamped with those same exact validations, but you're also like sticking it in a safe basically, or sealing the envelope maybe so you can't see what's inside. That actually might be a better analogy because ESP, since we're encrypting everything, we have to make sure that packet is still readable. So in the same way that we have an AH header, there's also an ESP header, and they function pretty much the same way. It's just whether the payload is encrypted or not. So any questions or anything you guys want to discuss on authentication headers and encapsulating security payloads?
Josh, on the ESP, right? ESP, based on the mode, it provides encryption. If you use the the transport mode, it won't provide encryption.
Yeah, okay. And was that a question, Sravanan, or was that more something from your knowledge?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. So that's a great question on there. My understanding is that ESP always encrypts the payload on there, so it would it works well with tunnel or transport mode. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I have a couple practice questions. It's going to be a little difficult to do them without a poll. So let me just read through and see how I can maybe ask these in simpler terms. So I'm going to ask a question, and I want to know whether we should use transport or tunnel mode, and whether we should use an authentication header or ESP header. So you have kind of two parts to that question. Is it transport or tunnel mode? And then what type of header do we want to use? So let's use this scenario. Our organization is going to set up a site-to-site VPN, and we're going to connect our headquarters with some remote office. And we're working with kind of sensitive data. Let's say we're a hospital. We've got some sensitive data. We're sending it from our headquarters to a remote office, and we want to make sure we have confidentiality and integrity for the data. So what IPsec mode should we use in this situation?
Tunnel.
Tunnel, bingo. We're going to headquarters to a remote office. We have defined endpoints where we're going to go. We can use the concept of static routes here. Okay, so do we want to use an authentication header for this information, or do we want to opt to use encapsulating security payload?
I'd say encapsulating ESP.
Yeah, awesome. It gives us confidentiality, and we've got some sensitive data. So yeah, bingo. For this situation, we got a hospital, 2 sites. We're going to set up IPsec with tunnel mode, and we're going to use an encapsulating security payload. Now that configuration is as secure as it gets for that type of architecture, without bringing in concepts like zero trust, which we're not going to go into tonight. That was one of those poll questions that Sarah posted. So we are going to go through some ZTNA, zero trust network architecture concepts. But in the context of the topics we're discussing tonight, tunnel mode, while using an encapsulating security payload, is the most secure type of VPN that you can implement. It does actually take a good amount of configuration for tunnel modes most of the time. Okay, great job. I think I saw someone raise their hand. I can't.
It was me. It was April. I wanted to, but you answered my question, because when we speak of tunnel mode, we're talking specifically about VPN, correct?
Yeah, that would be the most. Yeah,
there's the IPsec tunnel mode, right? I hope I'm not getting it confused.
You're exactly right. Yeah, tunnel mode is one of the 2 modes of operation for IPsec. So yeah, you're exactly right. And this it does turn into a VPN. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So, Josh, I have another question on the VPN because we are bringing up the VPN topic.
Yeah.
So this VPN is 2 types, right? There is a SSL VPN and an IPsec VPN. What would be the difference?
Yeah, that is a great question, and it has to do with certificates, and we won't get into that tonight, but let me jot that down, and we will go into that. SSL versus... Great, yeah, that's a great question. In general, some of the things, so again, SSL certs, who can tell me what SSL stands for?
Secure socket layer.
Excellent. Excellent, thank you. So IPsec is more secure, and it is more difficult to configure and set up properly. So that's a short answer I'll give on that. IPsec is more secure. It's also more difficult to set up. So yeah, great questions, Ravanan. We'll go into, I have that jotted down to go into the differences more. Okay, and then did someone else have, Alex, maybe you had your hand raised?
Yes, Josh, I was actually wondering for the exam itself, how technical or how detailed do you think the questions will be surrounding, VPNs and proxies? Is the test, is the exam really going to get into like the nitty gritty of, VPNs versus proxies and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question, Alex. And I hate to use the depends answer, but the thing to keep in mind for the CISSP is they're going to stop asking you questions about definitions for the most part. They're not going to ask you about what a proxy is or what a VPN is. They're going to use one or both in their questions or answers just as a part of a scenario. So your background knowledge is going to be what helps you to just understand what the question is asking. So good background knowledge and understanding of how each works, the differences, is really going to help in a lot of different questions, even though you might not get a question where the answer is it's a proxy or it's firewall or something like that. But I don't know if that answers your question there, but they're going to use these terms and definitions more to set up a scenario. So having good background and being comfortable with the concept is going to be really helpful versus memorization might not serve you as well. Do you have any follow-up questions on that, Alex, that might help me unpack that a little better?
No, you explained it well. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, you betcha. Okay. So let's see here. Let's do another practice question related to this. So let's take the same scenario of a healthcare organization, but let's say that we want to have secure communications between our application servers and our database servers. And let's take the scenario that we're just completely on site. All of it's on-prem. We have our own site here. So internal application servers and database servers. And our concern that we have is we want to make sure the data is integrous and that we can authenticate the origin of the data. And we since it's internal stuff, we want to still have pretty good performance. So what kind of a mode would we be looking at? Transport or tunnel for this? So we're a hospital. We want to have our application and database servers talking. We want to make sure integrity and authentication are validated. And we want to make sure performance isn't terrible.
Transport.
I think transport.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We can use transport mode, no problem. It needs to be flexible. There might be load balancers that are going on. There's all sorts of different servers that are at play. So the flexibility is nice. And we don't necessarily need to go through all the configuration of tunnel. Okay, great. What about authentication header versus ESP? Which would be a better fit for us there?
Authentication header.
Beautiful. Why is that?
Since it is within the same org, we don't have to necessarily encrypt it because there would be other means of security within the same org.
That is absolutely perfect. Yeah, that's exactly right. We don't necessarily need to be worrying about encryption for this. It's internal. And like Supriya mentioned, could be other areas where we have compensating security controls to protect that data.
Yeah, usually for that movement, that pipeline is usually segmented from regular traffic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we would have network segmentation as one of those defense in depth principles that's going to help to safeguard that information. I'm not sure who it was that shouted out.
Oh, it was LV. I'm sorry.
No, great, LV. Awesome. Thanks. I just work from my phone, so I don't see the names often. But
hey, Josh, quick question on that. From
yeah.
my understanding, you mentioned in the scenario that performance was one of the requirements, right?
Performance is one of the requirements, yes.
Okay, so isn't transport mode more resource intensive than tunnel mode?
Great question, Paul. Great question. Who wants to take a stab at answering that for Paul?
We are using authentication header so that we are not encrypting it, so that would reduce the work, that would save some time, workload.
Yeah, that's exactly right. How about the transport mode versus tunnel mode? Which one is easier on a system to handle?
The transport mode, because we are not encrypting the header.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So Paul,
but generally speaking, without the authentication header or ESP conversation, in general terms, isn't tunnel mode more resource intensive than transport?
It is. Yep. So tunnel mode, you're exactly right, Paul. It's more resource intensive because we're doing more encryption on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. The difference, though, I'll just call out, and forgive me, I don't have all of my names in front of me, so I don't remember quite who it was. I was just having this conversation with, but one of the other advantages of, or one of the things to keep in mind is in regards to latency. So while transport mode might have less overhead on there, tunnel mode potentially has fewer hops because it's almost using sort of a static route in a sense. It's still going over the internet, but it's defined points. So it potentially has fewer hops to take. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Paul. Tunnel mode, more intensive. Encapsulating security payload, also more intensive, because they're doing more encryption on there, which is pretty data heavy.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, you betcha. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. Since we don't have, since I don't really have our practice questions in front of me here, I'm going to go over two more terms, and I'll just have to thank you guys for your patience, and we'll have some more visuals and more practice questions on Thursday.
Josh, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, so since we know that in tunnel mode, the payload it's going to be encrypted, right?
Yeah.
So the first scenario that you presented, in which we chose the tunnel mode with ESP, which was definitely providing us with like the most security. But the requirements that we discussed were that we wanted to establish like between two distant points over the internet, like the connection basically. And we wanted to protect our information. So why can we not use authentication header with internal mode? Because the only advantage that we're getting using ESP is that the header information is hidden. The data would still be encrypted.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sarah. That's a great point. I don't have a strong answer for you on that, other than I think that's a really good question. I'm going to jot that down. So let me jot down on my list, because that's a very reasonable question. I'm just going to repeat it so everyone makes sure we're on the same page. And Sarah, correct me if I'm misunderstanding it. Tunnel mode is already going to be encrypting our, not just our packet, but also our header. So why would we need to use encapsulating security ESP? Why would we need to use ESP if it's already encrypted? Why couldn't we use authentication header since we're doing the encrypting anyways? If anyone does know the answer to that, please fire away. Otherwise, I'm adding.
Oh yeah. Okay. So authentication header, if you do, doesn't matter. Like you use the transport mode or a tunnel mode, it won't provide encryption in the authentication header.
Okay.
It provides only the integrity.
Only for integrity. Okay. Let's see. Tunnel.
So if you use ESP only, it provides encryption.
But do you need
can you
it?
repeat that?
Do you need it if it's tunnel? Do you really need the encryption if it's the tunnel mode, right?
So I'm talking about the authentication header, right? The authentication header, if you use it in terms of the transport mode or tunnel mode, it doesn't provide encryption. It provides only the integrity. So in that sense, we cannot use the authentication header because it's we need like over the internet.
Okay. We might
What about
need
the tunnel
ESP.
mode?
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I thought the question was. The question was if we use tunnel mode and it's encrypted from tunnel, from everything, encrypts everything, why do we care if we have
Yes, you have to combine it, right? In the congestion with like what is the type of the the IPsec method you're using, right? It's a authentication header or ESP. Authentication header is only for integrity. It doesn't matter like you're using tunnel mode or transport mode.
So what I'm going to do for one of our next sessions, gang, is I'm going to get some visuals. I wanted to have some more for us tonight, but I'll do some visuals that have a packet that we can look at. So when we use an authentication header, what happens to the packet versus we're using tunnel mode, what happens to the packet. So we'll unpack that in some greater detail that I hope will help answer that for all of us, because that's a question for me. Obviously, there's some questions for the group that are worth exploring. So Sarah, great question. And Sravanan, I appreciate you jumping in with an explanation. Thank you.
So I'm reading that the tunnel mode cannot be used without the ESP. So
okay, that
makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, to combine Sravanan's and Supriya's answers there, so tunnel mode, we couldn't use an authentication header because authentication headers don't provide confidentiality. So tunnel mode is linked to ESP. So I'm going to validate that just to do my own research and get up my confidence on it. But Supriya, I think you're and Sravanan, I think you guys are absolutely right.
I think that made it all click.
Yeah, good job, guys. That's the whole point of a study group. I didn't know an answer, and you guys jumped in and solved it for us. Great job. Okay, I'm going to cover two terms. First of all, I want to acknowledge we are at the end of our hour. You guys have heard my spiel on this before because I go overtime every week. I am committed to you guys getting out of here on time. So if you got to pop smoke and go enjoy your evening or your morning, absolutely go do that. You can just jump off the call. Thank you for being here, though, and for your patience, especially with me losing power this evening. I really enjoy getting to be with you guys. So you're welcome to hop off. I have two more terms I want to cover here, so we'll be on for another 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, the two terms. We're going to talk about IKE, and we're going to talk about Security Association, SAs. So IKE, someone provided that for us before, Internet Key Exchange. Who can tell me a little bit about what this is? Does anyone want to take a stab at giving us a little bit of an intro to what that term means?
What's the Internet Key Exchange?
Yeah.
That's for the key exchange between the host.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is, if you remember in the last couple of weeks, as we've been talking a lot about email signatures and PKI, we've also discussed certificate authorities and their role of making people's public keys available across the internet. Internet Key Exchange is part of how all of this is facilitated. So it just is the next step in that process of how keys, public and private keys, are exchanged over the internet. So it's Internet Key Exchange. That's how that whole certificate authority and key process is facilitated. So if I want to send an email to Alex, then, and I don't have his public key, then the certificate authority is going to be who provides that for me, as long as he's provisioned a certificate. And then the Internet Key Exchange is going to be the protocol behind the scenes. It's going to help us start those negotiations and actually set up a channel of communication. So we've heard and talked about the term negotiation. And just to throw out a couple of the concepts, one of the things we're referring to with negotiation is if Alex and I are starting a conversation, how do we know what hash algorithm we're going to use? I mean, it seems like kind of a small thing, but there's a lot of them out there. And if we use a different hashing algorithm, we're not even close to being on the same page for our communications. So how do we actually define what those are? We use what are called security associations, SAs. So I think on Thursday, we'll probably go into greater detail on these, but I'm going to give you guys the bullet points, kind of the cliff notes. Cliff, no pun intended on you, buddy. I'll give you the cliff notes on IKE, Internet Key Exchange, and security associations. So Alex, I'm going to pick on you, buddy, but I'm going to reach out to Alex again, and we're going to exchange public keys using the Internet Key Exchange. So we both have each other's public keys, and we can start talking to each other. Well, in order to start that exchange, first, who can tell me when Alex and I are using PKI, what is the process called, the cryptographic process behind the scenes where we can create a shared key together?
April or something like that.
Say it one more time for me, April.
I
What
thought
was
it
that, Joshua, again?
I'm not sure.
We're talking
That's
about the Diffie-Hellman?
Key generation.
Diffie-Hellman. Yeah, there we go. I knew someone was going to get it. Perfect. Diffie-Hellman exchange. So what is happening when Alex and I reach out to each other? The Internet Key Exchange is using our security associations, which initially are just to establish the baselines of how are we going to do this Diffie-Hellman exchange? What sort of things are your system and your network connections configured and capable of using? What are the equivalents that I'm capable of using? And that's our first security association. All it is think of it like a contract or a document with like an SLA. Well, not an SLA. First of all, who can tell me what SLA means? It's completely off topic, but that's an acronym.
Service level agreement.
Bingo. Okay. You guys all know that. You work in the field. Okay. So it's not a service level agreement, but it tells you how and what you're willing to offer. So in a few sessions ago, we pulled up the cipher suites on a Windows computer. We just looked at group policy and looked at what ciphers are enabled. And that's exactly what's happening behind the scenes. Those security associations are passing that information around so that Alex and I can start our communications off on the same page. So there are actually 2 security associations that take place here. So the first is during that Diffie-Hellman exchange. We have to get on the same page of how are we going to even start talking to each other. So that's that first security association that happens. But we're using that Diffie-Hellman exchange to establish some kind of a secure connection for us. So once we have that Diffie-Hellman exchange complete, we have a new security association that's established for that connection net. So that's something to just keep in mind. There are 2 security associations that happen when there's an initial data connection that's established. So the first is just to get through that Diffie-Hellman exchange. The second is for your actual session. So that's IKE and security associations. Before I go on to IKE version 2, which will kind of be the last thing we really talk about tonight, does anyone have any questions or comments on those 2 concepts? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So IKE Internet Key Exchange has version 1 and it has version 2. Anyone want to take a guess which one's stronger?
Which one? What?
Which one is stronger or more secure?
Will it be version 2?
It is. It is. You got any idea why? There's a couple of reasons. So even if you throw out a guess, you might not be wrong.
Oh, it's the most current version. I would suspect it's the most.
Yep. Paul's got the easy answer for us. It's the most current version. That's easy. They must have fixed something. So you're 100% right.
Is the key longer in IKE 2?
Hopefully.
So, that's a good question. I don't know that the key is necessarily longer, and I think the key length would be a little bit more dictated by that security association. But I'm not positive whether that is or is not related to IKE. I don't think so. But a couple of the things that are distinct, IKE version 1 happened in 2 phases. That's something that's worth noting as a distinguishing factor. IKE version 1, 2 distinct phases. IKE version 2 simplified the whole process and made it more efficient and got it down to 1 phase. So that's one of the key differences, just efficiency, really. It's doing the same process, but better. So let's see, another difference is on the efficiency, it's fewer messages that are actually going through that exchange process. So for IKE version 1, there was kind of a main or like a primary or default mode. I don't remember what the term is exactly, but there's 6 messages that are negotiated or that go back and forth to negotiate that SA or set up that connection. There is a faster mode, and I think they call it aggressive mode. It's only 3 messages, but it's also less secure. IKE version 2 gets rid of that. It cuts us down to just 4 messages, and it's secure. It gets everything set up. So it's faster, and it provides for more security in that way. Another one of the big differences, and this is one of the things that will be important for the exam, IKE version 2 provides way better mobile support. Way better mobile support. So there's actually something, I've always called it MoBike. It's IKE, but with MOB in front of it. It's mobility and multi-homing protocol. MoBike. All that is, the only difference between this and kind of the old school IKE is that it allows us to maintain a session connection even if our IP address is dynamic. Tell me why that's important. Someone knows the difference between dynamic and static IP addresses and why that could potentially mess with the connection.
Because the dynamic IP rotates?
Yeah. Yeah. What happens if you're in the middle of a conversation and your IP gets rotated? Well, you got to start all the way from scratch and re-authenticate and restart a session. What happened to the old data? We're losing continuity. That's exactly right, Alex. So key thing is IKE version 2 support. It's better for mobile devices, and that includes like tablets, not just phones, but tablets or laptops that are switching networks. So think of remote users. Very important for remote users. If they're working from their home office, then they go to a coffee shop, then they're on the plane. They need to have that so that their sessions are more, not only are they more secure and more efficient, but they actually can have, there's a term I'm looking for, where they stay in place over time. I'm missing there's a specific term for that, where something stays in place and doesn't rotate with the IP. But we might have time for that next week. So let's see if there's any last things that I want to cover today. If you guys have questions, shout them out. I'm just looking through my notes to see if there's anything important.
I have a question, Josh.
Yeah, fire away, Alex.
Just speaking of like static IP addresses and like, let's say working with VPNs, if you're working with a VPN and you have a dynamic IP address that's constantly rotating, what would be the advantage of getting a static IP address through a VPN provider? Would it be strictly for like whitelisting your IP address to certain websites, or?
Yeah, really good question, Alex. Really good question. So, I mean, to take a step back, we're discussing the benefits of static versus dynamic IP addresses. And you nailed a couple of them. Whitelisting or blacklisting. I mean, in this case, whitelisting is an important one. You don't want to be whitelisting a dynamic IP address because it doesn't belong to you. It's going to get rotated out into a pool and go to someone else, and then your connection won't work, but some strangers will if they figure it out. So yeah, that's a great point on that. The reason, and a couple other reasons people might want static IP addresses, they might want them on mailing servers, because it builds trust if emails come from the same IP address, the same server. This is also important. We haven't discussed these yet, but when we talk about email, eventually we'll discuss some of the anti-spoofing measures like SPF, Secure Policy Framework. I think that's what it is, SPF. DKIM, Domain Key Identification Management. Someone's going to correct me on these. I'm not perfect. And then DMARC, Domain Message Authentication something. So those 3 methods are different ways that we can prevent spoofing. And we can use those types of controls way better if we have static IPs, because we can just list a static IP to, like you said, whitelist, essentially, of saying anything that comes from this IP belongs to this organization. There's a lot of other advantages to static IP addresses for sure. They do cost money. That's almost always the case. They usually cost something because you're, in a sense, you're owning that IP address. When it's dynamic, you're just leasing it. It gets rotated back into a pool. The reasons that someone might want a dynamic IP address, especially in the context of a VPN, is they might want more privacy, or anonymity might be a better word for it. So if you use a VPN provider like NordVPN or something like that, and you try to go to a site that really doesn't like you using a VPN, I mean, anything doesn't like you using a VPN with ad blockers these days, it might recognize that and try and block your connection. If you are using a rotated or a dynamic IP address, it's a little bit more difficult to see whether you're using a VPN or not. It's still possible, but you haven't built a reputation on the internet. So anonymity is the reason why dynamic might be favorable in that situation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to wind down on content. I have a couple of things I want to call out, and I should have brought this up at the very beginning. There is going to be a change to study group starting likely sometime next week. So currently we have been doing 2 sessions per week, Tuesday and Thursday evening, different content between the sessions. We have quite a few people, I mean, even here tonight, that are international. And so they're up in very odd hours making the time to be here for study group. So we're going to make a change and be doing 1 session, one offered more for US or Americas based people, and then one that's more for Europe, Asia, India areas. So there's going to be a poll released in the study group in the school platform, asking you to vote on days and asking you to vote on times. You guys are the ones that are actually showing up here. There's a big community. Technically, there's hundreds and hundreds of people that are involved in the school community. But I'm bringing this up because you guys are the ones that are actually showing up to the live study groups. So please vote on those. Please send me a message. Please send Sarah, someone a message or a post if the days and times are important to you. Because I want to make sure we're not going to accommodate everyone, but I want to accommodate as many people as possible, especially if you're going to be the type of person actually showing up. So I want to call it out because it's really important to me, and I know it's important to you guys too. So I'll wrap things up there, guys. I'm available if you have other questions, or even if you just want me to add some more things onto my list for what's next. So yeah, fire away if you have questions or comments.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I sure appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good evening.
You guys are the best. Thank you. Good luck studying this week.
Thank you.
Yeah, Saravanan, I see you got your hand raised. You got a question?
Yes. So when to stop studying?
When to stop studying? Did I understand that question right?
Yes.
Oh, boy. I don't know that I could answer that question, Saravanan. I think you'll always be studying. To stop studying for the CISSP?
Yes, I already failed the first attempt. Like I want to go for the second one, but I don't know when to stop it.
Okay, well, let's, I have some information prepared that I was hoping to go over tonight, but it's pretty visual. So I have something prepared that we can go over next week, first thing, that maybe will help answer that question. But it's kind of how I make sure it's like, when am I ready to take the exam? So we'll, I'll go through that next week. Hopefully that'll be helpful. But if not, then send me a message on school and we'll chat about it more. Okay, Will, Annette, I see you guys are hanging out. Did you guys have questions or just hanging out to hear anything?
Yeah, just hanging out. Thank you. Thank you so much. Enjoy your
Absolutely. I love you guys' questions. Will, Annette, and Saravanan, you guys are just doing a great job. Reach out to me if there's anything I can do for you guys, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. See you guys later. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.